He walked into the courtroom smiling, not the nervous smile of a man about to learn his fate, not the forced smile of someone trying to hold it together. This was a man mugging for the cameras like he was walking a red carpet. He waved, he threw up peace signs. He smirked at the gallery like this was all some kind of show put on for his entertainment. Then he opened his mouth and said the words that would make every single person in that courtroom want to scream.
My name is Desmond Burks. I like to say I'm not a murderer, I'm not a killer. I'm a regular person like everybody in this room. I'm not gay as what the prosecutor want me to be.
His name is Desmond Burks. He was 35 years old, and he had just pleaded guilty to the murder of a beloved Detroit neurosurgeon whose body was found stripped nearly naked, wrapped in a blood-soaked carpet, and stuffed into a third-floor attic crawl space. He also pleaded guilty to killing a 67-year-old grandfather in a separate incident less than a year later. 2 men dead, 2 families shattered. And this man stood before the court throwing peace signs. But before we get to that courtroom, before we get to the moment the judge looked him dead in the eye and told him the truth about what he really is, we need to go back. Back to a mansion on Boston Boulevard. Back to a neurosurgeon who should have been visiting his dying mother. And back to the night everything was taken from him. The Boston Edison neighborhood sits on the northwest side of Detroit, where it is one of those historic districts where the homes still carry the weight of old money. Grand facades, manicured hedges, the kind of architecture that makes you slow down when you drive through. The houses here were built for doctors, industrialists, and executives. And even today, they hold that same quiet dignity. At 150 West Boston Boulevard, there stood a mansion valued at $1.2 million. It was a sprawling, beautiful property that belonged to Dr. Devin Hoover, a 53-year-old neurosurgeon who worked at Ascension St. John Hospital. Dr. Hoover was the kind of man people describe without hesitation: compassionate, hardworking, generous. His family called him their strength. He was the one everyone leaned on, the one who showed up, the one who held things together when life got hard. And life was about to get very hard. Dr. Hoover's mother, Loretta, was dying. He had plans to travel to Indiana to be at her side. This was not something he would miss. Not for anything. His family expected him. His mother needed him. And Devin Hoover was not the kind of man who let the people he loved down, but he never made that trip. On April 22, 2023, Dr. Devin Hoover was inside his home on Boston Boulevard, and so was Desmond Burks. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand who Desmond Burks was long before he ever stepped foot inside that mansion. Burks was a man with a history. One, he had previously been convicted of arson and served nearly 9 years behind bars before being released during the summer of 2022. He also carried a prior felony firearm conviction. He had no steady job, no career, no legitimate source of income. What he had was a network of people he used. Those who knew him described him as a hustler. He sold pills, he engaged in sex work, charging men for sexual services, and he cycled through romantic and sexual partners, convincing them to pay his bills, buy his clothes, purchase his phones, give him rides, rent cars and hotel rooms for him, and even file his taxes. Burks did not earn money. He extracted it from people. And one of those people was Dr. Devin Hoover. Burks and Hoover had been involved in an intimate relationship for years, going back to at least 2022. Over the course of that relationship, the two exchanged roughly 4,000 text messages. Burks would occasionally charge Hoover for sexual encounters, and Hoover, a successful neurosurgeon with a luxury home, a Range Rover, expensive watches, and plenty of cash, became just another source of money for Burks to drain. But there was something else simmering beneath the surface. Prosecutors said Burks was jealous, envious of the life Hoover had built, the career, the home, the watches, the wealth, everything Burks wanted but could never earn. And that jealousy found a specific trigger. The Hoover had invited another man he met at Palmer Park to watch him and Burks together. For Burks, this was a breaking point. Not out of heartbreak, out of wounded pride, out of rage. On the night of April 22, 2023, inside that mansion on Boston Boulevard, Desmond Burks raised a firearm behind Dr. Devin Hoover and pulled the trigger. Twice. Both shots struck the back of Hoover's head. Execution style. The man never saw it coming. What Burks did next reveals exactly who he is. He stripped the body. When Dr. Hoover was eventually found, he was wearing nothing but a pair of black socks. Burks wrapped the body in a carpet soaked with blood. Then he dragged it through the house and up to the third floor, shoving it into an attic crawl space, leaving it face down in the dark. Then he went shopping. Just 8 minutes after the murder, the first fraudulent transaction hit. Burks had taken everything: Hoover's phone, his wallet, large amounts of cash, his credit and debit cards, and 2 Cartier watches. One was a silver Pasha model that Hoover had purchased just the day before for over $7,000. The other was a Ballon Bleu worth more than $6,000. In total, the value of what Burks stole that night, including the luxury SUV, came to roughly $95,000. He drove away from the mansion in Hoover's white Range Rover, a vehicle worth somewhere between $72,000 and $81,000. He parked it on Coyle Street, just blocks from his own address, blocking someone's driveway. Surveillance video captured him limping away from the SUV carrying a backpack. The limp came from a prior gunshot wound to his hip. And inside that Range Rover, investigators would later find his fingerprint. But Burks was not worried about evidence that night. He was too busy spending. Within an hour of the murder, Burks was at Fairlane Mall in Dearborn. He was spreading a wad of cash across the counter of a jewelry store, or buying diamond earrings and a pendant. Witnesses saw a man who looked completely different from the broke hustler they knew. Suddenly, he was polished, flashy, dripping with new jewelry, wearing one of Hoover's stolen Cartier watches on his wrist, Cartier eyewear on his face, and he had given himself a new name: Big Money Days. He was sending money to other people. He was buying a second phone. He was walking through that mall like a man who had just won the lottery, and in a way, well, he believed he had. Over the following days, Burks racked up at least $21,000 in fraudulent bank and Cash App transactions, with some estimates pushing that number well past $30,000. He transferred money to himself. He made purchases. He burned through another man's life savings while that man's body lay face down in an attic, and the evidence trail was staggering. Hoover's phone was tracked by geolocation data. It traveled from the mansion to Burks's neighborhood, and then briefly back to the mansion, then back to Burks's area, and finally to Fairlane Mall. It never returned home, but Burks knew there were loose ends, so he started asking people to make them disappear. He handed a 9mm handgun, wrapped in plastic, to an associate and asked them to get rid of it. That person tossed it into the deepest part of the Rouge River while Burks watched. He gave another person a backpack containing clothes, toothpaste, a gun, and one in a box that had Hoover's name printed on it, along with a pair of surgical goggles. He asked around about a chop shop for the Range Rover. One of his lovers used Hoover's stolen credit card to buy herself something nice, and then purchased a $3,000 pair of Cartier glasses for Burks. Everyone around him was being pulled into the aftermath, and nobody was calling the police. On the evening of April 22nd, yet someone called in a parking complaint about a white Range Rover blocking a driveway on Coyle Street. Police responded and noticed blood visible inside the vehicle. They towed it and drove to Hoover's mansion for a welfare check, but when nobody answered, they left. The gate was open. They did not go further. The next day, April 23rd, Dr. Hoover's family knew something was horribly wrong. Devin had not shown up to see his dying mother. He was not answering his phone. This was a man who did not disappear. They called 911 and requested a well-being check. When officers arrived at the mansion this time, they noticed blood on the rear exterior door. They forced entry, and during the protective sweep of that massive home, they made their way up to the third floor, into the attic crawl space. There, face down, wrapped in a blood-soaked carpet, wearing nothing but a pair of black socks, lay the body of Dr. Devin Hoover. When the Wayne County medical examiner confirmed the cause of death, 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head, the manner of death was ruled a homicide. 4 days later, Hoover's mother, Loretta, passed away. She died without ever seeing her son again, without ever knowing what happened to him. The man who was supposed to be at her bedside was already gone. The investigation that followed was unlike anything the Detroit Police Department had handled in recent memory. Prosecutor Kim Worthy would later call it a massive undertaking, and the numbers back that up. Over 71 law enforcement officers were involved. More than 87 civilians were interviewed or called as witnesses. 300 pieces of evidence were collected. 134 search warrants were executed across 5 states and 3 countries. 57 phone extractions were performed, generating terabytes of digital data. 24 surveillance videos were reviewed. 94 items were tested at the Michigan State Police Crime Lab. All of it pointed to one man. Burks was questioned as a person of interest on April 28, 2023, and released on May 2nd. Strangely, a break-in occurred at Hoover's home on the night of April 29th. The details of that incident remain limited, but the timing raised serious questions. Months passed. Investigators kept building. And then on April 17, 2024, while still under scrutiny for the Hoover murder, Desmond Burks killed again. Rita Saleh was 67 years old. He was a grandfather from Dearborn. His family described him as their protector and their foundation. On that evening, around 6:45, at the intersection of West Chicago Street and Greenfield Road, Saleh's car bumped into the back of Burks's vehicle, a minor fender bender, the kind of thing that happens every day in every city. Both men got out. Words were exchanged. When and then Burks struck Saleh in the head with a single punch, knocking the older man unconscious. Saleh collapsed to the ground. Burks walked away, left him lying in the roadway, did not call for help, did not check if the man was breathing. Rita Saleh was rushed to the hospital with a severe head injury. He fought for more than 3 weeks. On May 11, 2024, he died from those injuries. A grandfather, a protector, gone because of a fender bender. On August 8, 2024, Desmond Burks was formally charged for the murder of Dr. Devin Hoover. The charges included first-degree premeditated murder, felony murder, larceny of $20,000 or more, using a computer to commit a crime, felon in possession of a firearm, and 3 counts of felony firearm as a second offense. His bond was set at $1 million, and he was held at the Wayne County Jail. A 4-day preliminary examination took place the following June. Witnesses took the stand. Several of Burks' lovers testified after being granted immunity. They identified him on surveillance video parking the Range Rover and limping away. They described how he went from being broke to suddenly dripping with cash and jewelry. They recalled him bragging about big money while wearing a dead man's watch. One person testified to watching the gun get tossed into the Rouge River. Another admitted to helping dispose of the backpack. The judge at the preliminary hearing rejected the defense's claim that Burks's limp made it physically impossible for him to drag Hoover's body to the attic. Probable cause was established, and Burks was bound over for trial. Then on January 21, 2026, just as jury selection began for what was expected to be a 6-week trial, Burks made a decision. He pleaded guilty. Second-degree murder for the killing of Dr. Hoover, along with larceny, computer crime, felon in possession, and felony firearm. The first-degree murder charge was dropped. He also pleaded guilty to manslaughter for the death of Rita Saleh. He admitted it, on the record, in open court, which makes what happened next even more unbelievable. On February 20th, 2026, Desmond Burks stood before Judge Paul Cusick for sentencing. From the moment he entered the courtroom, Burks treated the proceedings like a performance. He smiled at the cameras. He waved. He threw up peace signs. He smirked during testimony. And when the victim impact statements began, the statements from families who had lost everything, he rolled his eyes. He scoffed. He shook his head. He mugged for the cameras as though none of it mattered. Then it was his turn to speak, and what came out of his mouth stunned the courtroom.
My name is Desmond Burks. I like to say I'm not a murderer, I'm not a killer. I'm a regular person like everybody in this room.
He paused as if that statement made perfect sense.
I'm not gay as what the prosecutor want me to be. Not a gang member. I love sports. I'm a people person. I didn't intentionally meant to kill the guy about the road.
He looked around the room as though he expected someone to agree with him.
Sorry about what happened. But can't bring it back. About the doctor stuff, just because I took the plea, don't mean I did it. Some gay killer or a gay person and a gang member in the same breath. That don't even mix. It's impossible. That's all I gotta really say. I have nothing else.
A people person, the man who shot another human being twice in the back of the head, stripped his body, wrapped it in a carpet, and hid it in an attic while he went jewelry shopping, stood in a courtroom and called himself a people person. Judge Paul Cusick had heard enough. He looked at Burks and delivered his response with the kind of cold, measured clarity that leaves no room for interpretation. The sentence came down. For the murder of Dr. Devin Hoover, Burks received 35 to 60 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections, plus 5 additional years served consecutively for the weapons charge. For the manslaughter of Rita Sala, he received 10 to 15 years to be served concurrently. Now, Desmond Burks will be behind bars for decades. The man who called himself Big Money Des, who wore a dead man's watch and flashed stolen cash at a jewelry counter, who smiled and waved and threw peace signs while grieving families poured out their pain, that man will now spend the best years of his life in a cell.